Good evening. It's 6 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a work session meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council for September the 24th, 2024. And tonight is a joint meeting of City Council with the Manitou Springs Planning Commission. We're delighted to have you here. Our sole purpose in life tonight is to discuss Plan Manitou, get an update. Councilor Weatherholt is excused tonight. She's trying to catch up on things. And I just got a text from Councilor Shada. He's not feeling well, so he won't be joining us tonight. So just minutes ago. So with that, I'll call council roll. Councilor Chandler,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Fortune,
Present.
Councilor Johnson.
Here.
Councilor Wolf,
Here.
and the mayor is also present. I'll let Alan Delbich, Chair of the Planning Commission, call the roll for the Planning Commission.
Okay, Commissioner Graybill,
Here.
Vice Chair Casey,
Present.
Commissioner Wilson,
Present.
Commissioner Storm,
Here.
Commissioner Armstrong.
Great. Thank you. And on behalf of council, I'd like to thank the members of Planning Commission coming here on Tuesday night. I know that's not your regular meeting night, but we appreciate you accommodating us, and I think it'll be a good meeting, productive. So please feel welcome. Oh, okay. Alan, if you could introduce Megan.
And Commissioner Day just walked in, so another commissioner.
Great. So with that, I guess we'll go ahead and we'll get started here. Fred, our planning director, can open it up and we'll have a discussion here.
Okay, Mayor, thank you very much. For the record, Fred Rolandhagen, Planning Director for the city. I think this is my first time addressing to the City Council, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, and thank you also for planning commissioners for being here as well. What we're doing here is just a status update of the Plan Manitou 2.0 project. So the purpose is to share findings from the first round of public outreach, which occurred throughout the summer. We had a number of public outreach opportunities, both online as well as in person. We did some pop-up meetings, pop-up things in outside for the ice cream social and some other activities. And so we are here to summarize that input. We're also here to seek input on the approach to the Plan Manitou update and strategic priorities and review the next steps in the project. So as you know, this is a major project. It's the update, the Plan Manitou 2.0 is a major project that updates the current Plan Manitou comprehensive plan for the city. And the focus on this particular update is the goals and the policies within Plan Manitou, and to verify, number one, making sure that they're still relevant for 2024, identify revisions or identify additions to them, and to number three, strategically prioritize these goals for effective implementation. So for recommended action, at least for tonight, we are providing the status update on the project in hopes that this will elicit a discussion, and so we can receive input or any thoughts from you all on the current direction that we're going in before we begin reviewing, before our consultants start preparing drafts of the revision for your review and for public review, which is going to come later on. And on that, I will turn it over to our consultants.
And gentlemen, if you would introduce yourselves and give us your titles.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council, Planning Commissioners. Great to be here. My name is Paul Donegan, and I'm here representing Clarion Associates, which is the prime consultant on this project. With me
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council, and Planning Commissioners. Thanks again for being here this evening with us. I'm Andy Rutz. I'm a principal with Crescendo Planning and Design, supporting Clarion on this effort.
Great, thank you. And you seem to be doing pretty well, but generally, if you can be about 3 inches away from the microphone you speak, that works best for our system, it seems. And this is being streamed, so we have maybe a little bit bigger audience than you might anticipate. I think probably, and we had an opportunity to discuss this a little bit. I think your intent, you'd like to go through the presentation, and then towards the end there, we could probably have a more robust discussion. So we would ask council members and planning commission members if you need to ask a question, for clarification, let's feel free to do so. But in general, if we could focus most of our discussion after they've had a chance to present all their information, I think that would be the most effective way to do it. Okay, back to you.
Perfect, thank you. And then we have a presentation for you all, which I don't think is on the, oh wait, that'll work. So just quickly, the objectives for the meeting, we'll be kind of covering things in 4 phases. And so we'll get through the first 2 before we dive into too much discussion. But first of all, we wanted to give you guys a project status update. And then following that, Andy would be providing you guys some highlights from round 1 of the outreach, which happened over the course of the summer, as Fred had outlined. And then the third part is we wanted to get input from you all on the preliminary approach to the updated plan, and specifically how to do, based on your input, strategic prioritization. And then at the very end, a little bit of just next steps, things to look forward to as the project continues. Okay. Oh, it is. Sorry. All right, next slide. Okay, thank you. No, maybe it's catching up. There we go. So just a quick overview of the project timeline. This project started at the beginning of 2024, and we'll be working towards wrapping it up in spring of 2025. And then just to highlight, as part of the phase 2, this meeting was rescheduled from mid-August. So that's why there's a little bit of a gap from the July outreach and sort of this opportunity to give you guys the update about what we've heard. On the next slide, just a quick reminder of some of the deliverables that have been made available over the course of the project so far. The first of which is the plan assessment. This was work that was done in collaboration with staff to sort of identify what parts of the plan have been implemented, what parts of the plan are being implemented, what parts of the plan haven't been implemented, and then starting to identify some potential focus areas for this next iteration of the plan. And that is, a somewhat difficult task, and that a lot of projects do take place over a long time horizon. And so sort of lumping those into those groups isn't necessarily an exact science, but we did want to sort of get an idea of where things stand so far in terms of plan implementation as part of this update process. I'll try to forward here. All right. Yeah, it worked. Okay. And one of the things you'll notice sort of in the depths of that plan assessment is this sort of matrix that sort of gets into the nitty-gritty of all the different factors that were looked at and sort of how they tie into the plan policies. And I don't necessarily want to dwell too much on this level of detail. This is available if you're interested in looking into the depths of it. But for the most part, this was sort of what we were working on in the back end to sort of get an idea of where the things stand in terms of different policies being implemented. And one of the sort of final deliverables of this project is a tool for staff to be able to start keeping track of plan implementation and policies and action items. And this is sort of maybe a template of a tool that could be used that would be a little bit easier for staff to sort of keep track of who's responsible for what goals is this hoping to achieve, where do we stand on it, and how things are prioritized. So that's just sort of, I think, a little bit of the detail there to share with you. And then there we go. And then just some key takeaways that we wanted to share with you from the plan assessment. First and foremost, a lot of progress has been made, and I think that's part of revisiting Plan Manitou with this project, is sort of recognizing that a lot has been done in the last several years since the plan was adopted. And so this, I would say, is a quicker turnaround in terms of revisit and update of a plan than is typical, and that's really a reflection of just how much has been accomplished already. And then just to note that there's some ambitious efforts that have run into practical limitations. I think there's a lot in there that the initial plan sort of identified as good things to do, and I think part of having these years of implementation work that the city staff has done is identifying where there's some limitations that maybe we need to revisit, maybe we need to double down, or maybe we need to rethink in terms of what gets accomplished. And one of the challenges there is with staff turnover and so many data points, it's been really hard for staff to sort of keep track of all the things that are going on. And so I think making sure that this next iteration of the plan has a little bit better metrics and opportunities for people to keep track and know where things stand is a big part of it. So one of the early things we've heard from the process through the process is that the vision statements and the goals and the policies that were outlined in the plan are generally still true. We didn't hear a lot of feedback from the community that what's in the plan from like a higher level policy standing needs to be rethought. And so this is really more of a strategic update. And so I want to make sure that that's clear that, we're not necessarily suggesting that the community is now thinking about these big issues in a substantially different way. But that those sort of like higher level policy directions are still relevant. And then because I've kind of highlighted this as well, but it's just been difficult, I think, for everyone to sort of prioritize what do we work on next when there is so much in the current plan. So with that, I'll get on to this next deliverable that's available online, and this is the community profile, which is now in a story map format, which is essentially it's a website that has maps and information and data sort of in one place. And this has been updated throughout the process as data has become available, and it sort of is essentially the ground rules, the baseline information that we're building the plan off of. And so some of this data you'll see informing a lot of the discussions in terms of prioritization going forward. So this is available and accessible on the Plan Manitou website, and it's something that will be maintained by the city going forward so that this information is available and can be updated and made current for people going forward after this project is completed. Some key takeaways from that is just some demographic information. Overall, the community is getting older. This is based on census data, but essentially there's a higher proportion of residents 65 and over. In terms of the overall population, I mean, we hear a lot about growth, but for Manitou Springs, the overall population has not necessarily been increasing. And so, I think maybe the hubbub in the community is maybe a result of other, increases in terms of people being in the community, whether that's from tourism or lodging or those different things. There is a limited opportunity for growth. You guys know that quite clearly, just in terms of the topography of the community. There's not necessarily a lot of opportunities to expand and grow. And then from a financial perspective, while revenue has gone up over the last decade or so, there is some uncertainty For example, there's a decline in sales tax revenue in 2023. And then I think the city is, as you guys are probably aware, there's potential changes to, cannabis access in neighboring communities that could be impactful to revenue for the community. So those are some of the baseline background information that there's a lot more, but those are some key things that we wanted to make sure are informing this conversation. And with that, I'll hand it to Andy to talk a little bit about what we've heard so far.
Thanks, Paul. So I'm going to try to go through, I think it's a couple dozen slides or so, just giving everybody a high level glimpse of what we've heard from the community at large, from many of you through work sessions, and from those of you who are serving on the working groups, and then from city departments and staff conversations we've had as well. So as Fred and Paul mentioned, this first round of really intensive outreach kind of took place over the entirety of the summer. We tried to really diversify the types of touch points, just understanding that some folks are more comfortable engaging in person. Some folks have really finite amounts of kind of free time or disposable time to invest in a process like this. So we wanted to provide some opportunities for kind of really quick touch points and engagement, especially online. And we've had really good turnout throughout the summer. I think Fred alluded to that. We had a kind of Plan Manitou 101 question of the week interface online that had really good response rates, over 200 people. We also had a question of the month in case the question of the week was a little too daunting. And we had 61 people participate in that. As Fred mentioned, staff did a lot of legwork in kind of piggybacking on events that we knew would be well attended by the community and maybe by folks who don't traditionally participate in a process like this. We've got a really engaged set of working group members, which is a group of individuals that City Council appointed. There are folks who are subject matter experts in specific pieces of the plan and or have really great presence in the community with like a specific set of constituents. And so we had a roundtable with all those folks towards the end of July. And even though the number may look underwhelming, that it was 15 individuals, I think they have the ability pretty uniquely to speak for a lot of the community sentiment, which is a huge advantage in a process like this. We had great turnout from the community in this room for the kind of strategic priorities workshop that we held at the end of July. And then we've continued to get engagement on basically an online mirror of that workshop. So acknowledging if folks weren't able to attend that one evening over the summer, there was still the opportunity to provide the exact same inputs kind of at your leisure at home. So what I wanted to do is we've basically broken the plan elements into 7 categories, and we were trying to find a way to make what is a pretty complex set of content as accessible to the community and sort of digestible as possible. And so using that question of the week strategy, we were trying to ask really high-level, open-ended questions about each one of these 7 kind of categories. And then using that input we got from city staff, input we got from the working groups, input that we've gotten from the broader community at workshops. We asked in that late July strategic priorities workshop, here's the list of items that are either still in progress or they were identified as important in the last plan and maybe haven't been prioritized, or maybe they've emerged as something new through this process. And we asked folks to help inform, what from that list, knowing that the city's resources are finite, should be the really like strong priorities in the next 1 to 5 years. So first I'll go through, you'll kind of get the sense of the cadence of this presentation is going to be question of the week and then a bar chart showing that prioritization exercise. But on the question of the week content, as I mentioned, we tried to leave this pretty open-ended, both so that it would allow folks the opportunity to maybe provide new ideas that aren't already embedded in the plan, but then also to sort of implicitly help confirm, as Paul said before, kind of vision and goals content. And so the first of those questions, acknowledging that the community is expected to kind of grow at a similar rate going forward, we asked what are the things that the city really needs to prioritize the most from an economic development and tourism standpoint. And there was a lot of emphasis on sort of the balance, I would say, of welcoming tourists, but meeting community needs, making sure that the local business base remains really vital and strong, making sure that the permanent resident priorities really get addressed first and foremost. So while welcoming the tourists, make sure we're focusing on taking care of our own, and then a lot of emphasis on maintaining the character and the feel here in the community. Then we had, as I mentioned, we had kind of culled down a short list of what we were calling preliminary priorities. And we asked folks to only select 2 of these, just to, again, try to get at that sentiment of a finite set of resources that we're working with as a community. And so, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the one you can see here at the bottom is really focused on destination management and how we can balance community needs and the economic vitality that comes from tourism. We also heard a lot of interest, and the breakdown on these slides, just so you kind of get comfortable with the visual, is the green bar represents the in-person responses we got from the community. The orange represents the online responses, and the blue represents our working group priorities. And we've just aggregated all of those. And so the other one we heard a lot from the in-person and online responses was finding opportunities to diversify the business offerings and piggyback both on some of the recreation-oriented activities, but then sort of the day-to-day resident needs. Next, we had asked folks to focus on the natural environment and sustainability. And we don't typically like to ask sort of a negative question, but we asked, as Manitou Springs moves forward, what are some of the biggest threats that folks are concerned about? We heard a lot about pollution of a variety of types. So everything from water, noise, light, and air pollution, with a particular emphasis on traffic and visitation. Heard concerns about homelessness, obviously climate change, natural disasters, given the community's unique position embedded within the environment. That's obviously a top of mind concern. On the prioritization then, we had, similarly asked folks, again, pick 2 from this sort of short list. One of the ones that we heard, I'd say most strongly, as shown here on the bar chart, is this desire to collaborate with regional partners. So an acknowledgement that there's a lot of great stuff happening in the county, in the region, and are there ways that Manitou Springs can sort of piggyback on other efforts to maybe take some of the capacity ask off of the local community? Similar to that, I think a desire to work with Fountain Creek Watershed District and really focus on protecting the riparian habitat surrounding the community. And then the last one I'll mention is the top line on this slide. And I think this desire to just sort of improve coordination and communication, both locally and more broadly, has been a consistent sentiment all the way through. Even down to, I'd say, some like granular feedback about whether it's better to get messaging out via social media or, more tactile kind of like bulletin board approach. And we've heard a variety of sentiments on that. In some cases, aligning with maybe the demographics you'd expect. And in other cases, I think just demonstrating that people want opportunities to engage and be informed in a really wide variety of ways, which does admittedly put a lot of pressure on city staff to try and meet that charge. So finding ways to lean on community partners to help spread the word, I think is something that really has resonated with folks. On transportation infrastructure and mobility, we had asked, what are the greatest needs in that category going forward? The first bullet is one that I feel like we hear in every community that we work in, particularly small towns that have a heavy tourism emphasis. And what that is that we've heard a strong sentiment of there's not enough parking and an equally strong sentiment of there's too much parking. I think one thing that we found both in the plan assessment and community profile is that the city has done a great job of setting up a parking management system that sort of meets the needs and evolves with the need. And so sometimes the feedback we get on parking is a sort of moment in time piece of information. Maybe it's responding to a community event that felt particularly congested. I think the takeaway on that is that it's always going to be a community priority to sort of understand the needs and demands and continue to assess and reassess and address that evolving need. We heard a lot about traffic management, which often goes hand in hand with the sort of perceived kind of parking, either challenges or surplus. And then a lot of desire from folks on more consistent public transportation options. And I'd say with an emphasis of providing opportunities for visitors and locals to maybe default to not, using their own personal automobile, which then over time could take some of the traffic management concerns down a bit. That's echoed as you see here in this prioritization. A lot of folks responded positively to continuing to explore opportunities to reduce congestion by essentially encouraging users to take other forms of transportation. So we've heard everything from, bigger sidewalks, more ADA accessibility to enable all users, ages, and abilities, bike lanes, increases in shuttle services, and trying to provide transit outside of the community, maybe with co-located parking opportunities so that folks coming into town aren't adding to the kind of congestion issues, especially in the downtown. On housing, neighborhoods, land use, built environment, admittedly, this is the type of question that tends to generate sort of wish list responses. And so the ask is, what kind of housing, land use, and amenities do you think the community needs? And that's a really broad category. And so what we tend to see in those responses are really broad responses. And I think the question we get a lot of times is how, as either a set of appointed or elected officials or city staff, do we influence things that, let's use a grocery store, for example, tend to be really market-driven sort of components. So I would say it's an important data point for the city to be aware of, that there is demand for something like that. What a plan like this can do is help ensure that there are land use decisions being made that don't preclude that type of use from coming. We've heard a lot about interest in maybe a more engaged economic development sector in the community. And so that could help provide direction on trying to incentivize attracting those types of uses into the community. But I would say more than anything, these are really helpful inputs to understand kind of the pressure points that the community is feeling right now and what the kind of growing demand is. So what we saw in the prioritization is really an emphasis on, and I think this piggybacks on the natural environment and sustainability conversation, finding ways to maintain defensible space and reduce wildfire risk, and then homeowners insurance demands. And I know the fire department's been working really hard in trying to be proactive about that. Human nature oftentimes is that we tend not to react until we're pressured to do so. And so we've heard a lot about, what are the kind of like hooks that we can get for folks to take advantage of the services that are available, because there's a sincere interest to provide those. Finding opportunities to keep enforcing regulations that really prioritize health, safety, welfare, and in particular protect the rental community. I think we've heard a lot from the broader community of the kind of vulnerability of affordable housing, and how is the city approaching making sure that community is really well protected. On arts, culture, and historic resources, this is something you all know Manitou Springs has in spades. I think you're the envy of many communities with this category. And so, we asked folks, what are the things that really set you all apart in your own eyes? We heard things that, we expected, like historic buildings, the springs, the indigenous history, that small town feel, this, vibrant local art community, and a lot of support for events. I think in the conversation with city staff and departments, there was also an acknowledgement of, like, while those are wonderful for the community, they also are a drain on resources in some instances. So maybe being intentional about the quantity of those going forward. This is one of the sort of biggest buckets, and I think this is just reflective of the fact that the community has so many assets in this category. Again, you see here, though, this desire to continue to work with and collaborate. And the specific on the one we heard the most feedback in was collaborating with CDPHE and making sure that the springs stay open and accessible. But I think the undercurrent to that is really just this emphasis of how do we leverage other folks who can be productive partners for the community. There's a lot of desire to emphasize the pre-settler history of the community. So how do we tell a story beyond just the community's founding formally? And then how do we really educate folks about just how much of a resource kind of dependent set of initiatives this category could be, and help link particularly homeowners or property owners to funding sources that may be available and maybe available uniquely to a community like Manitou Springs. Then on education, health, and public services, we asked, what are the other offerings you'd like to see available? Again, open-ended, runs the risk of generating a wish list. But I would say similarly, these are really important data points for us to understand on kind of what the pressure points are. So a lot of emphasis on safety, police presence. I think affordability has been a common thread through probably every category. It's probably a common thread through every conversation being had in the state, if not the country at this point. And then really finding ways to localize those community amenities as much as possible. One that I think we found really enlightening and insightful is this top one in the prioritization about acknowledging that Manitou Springs provides services, and particularly using the school district as an example, for folks who may not statistically be residents of Manitou Springs. And so there's been a desire in the conversations we've had to better understand sort of what we collectively define as the Manitou Springs community, knowing that we're providing services and opportunities for folks who may not be in the physical boundary. And so how do we make sure that those folks who are critical parts of the community feel that they're critical parts of the community and have influence over decision-making as well? Another one that I think we've heard a lot was the desire to create a food board to help leverage some of the local food system production. And I think the one, I guess, caveat to that, it's not necessarily a caution, but it's, the more boards, committees there are, the more demands there are on staff time. And so I think those are places where you all can provide really good direction on how do we, evaluate these community priority desires versus against a set of criteria to make sure we're making decisions that are sustainable and that we have the capacity to support. And Paul will touch on that in a couple slides here. And then the last of these categories was municipal governance and community engagement. A lot of desire, and I think this is true in many communities coming out of the pandemic, to just get us all back together, to leverage the fact that we live here for a reason and we enjoy being a part of the community. And so let's figure out our problems together, figure out ways that we can double down on the assets that we have, I think the continued emphasis on surveys to kind of gauge the pulse of the community and just broaden opportunities for communication. One of the ones that stands out here is a framework of sort of leveraging all of the passion and momentum that's in the community. I think, you know, we're well aware that there are a lot of really engaged residents and there are a lot of really engaged resident groups. And so how do we help those groups really be productive participants in the community, and make sure that they're not inadvertently duplicating efforts, especially when they're volunteering their time more often than not. Another piece of this is the explore expansion of city capacity for plan implementation. And I think that from what we heard from folks really spoke to how do we emphasize, you know, both staff retention, how do we acknowledge that the city staff is wearing a lot of hats across many departments. And so there is a risk of burnout. And so are there opportunities to, you know, maybe supplement the capacity we have in certain departments and take a little bit of the burden off of folks. And then sort of the overarching question of the month, what we wanted to do, and I think it kind of piggybacks on that, that sort of, I guess, educational through line of capacity and a finite set of resources, is we said, you know, using these 7 categories, if you had 100 units, so we're intentionally not attributing a dollar amount to them, but help us make the hard decision of where would you allocate those resources. And this tends to be I don't know, a really helpful exercise, I'd say, in an effort like this, because it helps us get a really high level sense from the community of, if I had to make a decision on where to kind of put my chips in, these are the categories that, you know, seem to really resonate. And you'll see natural environment and sustainability, and then transportation infrastructure and mobility rose a little bit to the surface in this one. I think this is also a helpful question to sort of ask repeatedly over time and see, as we start to implement things, does that take some of the pressure off that? And then can we divert our resources elsewhere? And then the last one I'll mention is we've had some really great conversations with city departments themselves. And a few bullets on a slide really doesn't do justice to the wealth of information that they've shared with us. But I think the sort of reassuring thing is that we asked each of the individual departments to sort of articulate their priorities, really responding to what are the daily, weekly, monthly needs that keep you up at night. And from what we heard from folks, they felt that Plan Manitou, as it is today, sort of broadly captures a lot of things that would align with the department's priorities, but maybe needs a little bit more detail on, you know, what do I accomplish next? Or if I have to make a tough decision between one or the other, how do I weigh that decision? And a lot of that input has also mirrored what we've heard from the community. One thing that I think was really insightful in our conversation with that group is Paul mentioned, you know, the tremendous amount of implementation that the community has done in the last 5 years. That said, there is a massive action item list in the existing plan. And so what we were hearing a lot of was we as a city staff have been focused on so many of these important initiatives within the community that sometimes we feel like we're behind and we just need to sort of catch up to sort of the baseline level that other peer communities operate at. And you can see a couple of those examples here. Things that are wild cards, like an unfunded mandate from the state. So the state will say you need infrastructure upgrades, but there isn't a path to funding that that's crystal clear. Things like routine maintenance, as that gets deferred, maybe you know, due to something else being prioritized, it starts to stack up and weighs heavily on folks, if not the community at large. Paul had mentioned just having better mechanisms of keeping records and mapping. And as you get behind in that, it only piles up. And then, you know, really importantly, hiring the best and brightest and keeping them when they're here and making sure they don't burn out. So I think there was a lot of interest in how do we just sort of make sure that we're stable so that then we can more effectively tackle, maybe a reasonable list of things moving forward. And I think that leads to, the onus sort of on our team and on staff and the community as we take this update across the finish line is to make sure that that maybe shorter list of really high priority short-term actions is inextricably tied to resource availability or projected resource availability to make sure that we're not communicating to the community, here are the priorities, but we haven't figured out a way to move them forward yet.
All right, I'll wrap up this section and then we'll dive in on the discussion. So one thing that our team put together was sort of this look at how Manitou compares to other communities. I don't know if they're peer communities or not, but just other communities in the region or of similar size, and just sort of seeing, where general fund revenue sits per capita. And I think an interesting thing to highlight about that is that in a lot of ways, the community resources are, I think are there to do work, and we've seen that with all the work that's been done and achieved. But also, if the level of service that's desired by the community is something that's above and beyond what the community actually has resources for, then that's a helpful thing to communicate. That just because Aspen is doing this doesn't mean that we're doing this because we have less resources. So we thought that was just sort of a helpful thing to inform the discussion, and as part of sort of like our background information research on this, it's just sort of identifying, what's reasonable and realistic. Good call. So that was a lot of information. Thanks for bearing with us. But that's just sort of to, I think, highlight for you all just sort of the breadth and the depth of information gathering that's been going on, and to sort of highlight for you a little bit about how these sort of potential community priorities came together. Is that it is a mix of information we've heard from the community, it's information we've heard from the working group, from departments, looking at just sort of the background data and information, how much growth is happening, what's the average house price, and how has that been changing, and so these are sort of all the different just data points and information that went into those, and I think we also, despite all that, had new ideas that came forward as part of this process. And so there's just no shortage of ideas out there for how we can move things forward. And so that really gets into the crux of this next phase of the project, which is, all right, we've got a lot of ideas, we've got a lot of priorities, we've got a lot of information. We need to start thinking about how we prioritize through those. So this is sort of, I guess, first opportunity that we really want to hear from you all, as we're starting to think about this screening criteria of, we've got this long list, and we want to hear from you all about how it makes sense to you to start prioritizing. Some ideas to get the conversation started is sort of if there's something that's already ongoing, do we want to see that out? Is that how we prioritize something? Do we want to make it higher or lower on the list if it requires new resources? We have to go out and find resources. What if it's a priority of community members and residents versus something that's more of a priority of city staff and you all potentially? Does the level of support, some of those bar charts of, we heard a lot that people really care about this, is that going to be a driving factor? And then I think sort of thinking about co-benefits, are there opportunities where one action or one effort can really achieve a few things? If there's some of that sort of bang for buck potential, we can use the same amount of resources to achieve multiple things. So those are some food for thought we wanted to throw out for you all, but I open it up to all your reaction to all this information and feedback on this, because I think this gets into the meat of this next phase.
Thank you. I think that gives us the opportunity to have about a 3-week long discussion. It would be, I mean, and if we understand that the discussion will, that's Manitou's future and we'll always be looking into the future. What I was wondering here, maybe it would make sense, and I'll ask you how you want to do this, if we would take the various topics, for instance, economic development and tourism, if we'd bring that screen up and then we could all speak to that, talk about that for a little bit. And just move through the sequence of you got 7 or 8 topics. We could do that. And then I guess the real crux that you're asking for is how do we filter this down? Where do we put priorities? Would you all be okay with that, or somebody have a different idea? Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So if you could, gentlemen, if you could go back to your slide deck, we'll start at the top one. I think it's economic development and tourism, but I may be wrong. Got slide 12, I think.
All right, and then is it more valuable for you to sort of have this, these bullet points of things heard from question of the week, or that bar chart? I guess I can switch back and forth if people want to direct me on that. If you,
Yeah, I think
take
we
a
could
closer look.
move back and forth between those two. We'll just try and focus our discussion on this subject area here for a little bit, and then we'll
Perfect.
move on. So, okay, the Planning Commission is in a sense the guest tonight. So, Alan, why don't you go ahead and we'll see what the planning commissioners have to say on economic development, tourism, and then we'll give City Council a chance.
Okay, who wants to speak up? David.
For as long as I've lived in Manitou, every time there's an election, candidates say, we're going to achieve a better balance between tourism and residents. And personally, I never see any significant changes. What I do see is that tourism grows and grows. And I can understand, businesses are promoting their interests. It's immediate to them and they have some significant resources, but from my point of view, something's out of whack there.
Could you expand on that when you make that statement, something's out of whack?
One of the slides showed that revenue, except in 2023, is up. I've asked myself, why do we have an economic development chamber of commerce? Now, Natalie gave me a very effective answer to that. We're competing with Georgetown and Blackhawk and other places. When is there enough? No, I think the balance has been to the detriment of residents and to the extra advantage of businesses.
Megan.
I think we've seen globally how some cities are saying enough is enough, like Barcelona and Paris, except for the Olympics. There are some communities that are high tourist destinations that are saying no more. We don't want you to come here. Please go somewhere else. And that's kind of the extreme that we may see if we keep facing more and more visitors, more and more congestion, difficulty to just get through town as a resident, and difficulty to afford housing, et cetera. So that's kind of the extreme that this might play out to. So what can we do now to try to mitigate becoming that extreme example of no, thank you, don't come here anymore. We want to still continue to welcome visitors and tourists, but as an example, myself living downtown, I really struggle to get in and out of town on certain times of the day and week. So it's a burden.
Yeah, I guess on this issue, I've been here for, a lot of us have been here like 30 or 40 years, and I see this in a glass half full perspective. Like we've accomplished a lot, I think, in the last 6 years, especially in coming up with strategies to reduce congestion. It's a never ending challenge, but some of the shuttles, looking at outlying parking, managing the incline better. These are good starting points. I have to commend the city staff and city council for getting so much accomplished over the last 6 years. And I think we just have to keep considering how do we do more? Can we do more robust control of the attractions? Because, even without a chamber, even without anybody pumping us up, people are going to come here. Pikes Peaks is here, the incline's here. There's lots of reasons people come here regardless. And, it's, what a great problem to have. Other communities are suffering by not having enough. And I think we just need to keep moving the ball down the field. And, and I think we're doing that. We're looking at, some of the things that I think help with congestion and the impact of tourism is trying to, park the cars and have other ways for people to get around so that we can have less congestion and less pollution. And we're accomplishing those things. And, I think, anyway, that's my positive spin on how it is.
I've lived in Manitou since 1976, and I haven't seen a dramatic increase. There's always been times in the summer when it's hard to get through town. When I came here in the 70s, it was that way. If you look historically at Manitou, tourism is part of the basis of why Manitou is here. It's part of why Dr. Bell established the community. So I don't know. I mean, when you look at in the 1890s, there were 200 plus shops on Ruxton Avenue going up and down Ruxton. It was the walk. I mean, there was a trolley that just ran up and down it for 5 cents. You could run from the Loop up to the Cog. And I can imagine how crowded it was when you got wagons and horses and people walking and a trolley trying to run up the middle of the road. So I just don't think the problem has dramatically changed in over 100 years.
Okay, and before we shift over to city council, any more planning commission folks want to speak to this? Okay, if not, okay, let's open it up to city council. Nancy?
Yeah, I appreciate the historic perspective. Thank you. And I also agree with Alan's mandate, well, not mandate, whatever, to manage, that we need to continue to put in manage mechanisms. I think that it is challenging. And however, we need to understand too, or the community needs to realize this delicate balance between having services or not, or reduce services. And over the past few years, we have been able to have enough funding to really catch up on a lot of deferred maintenance and some other things that we haven't been able to do in the past, or we kept deferring things more and more. And we've had more niceties. We were able to build, renovate the library, which is great. So I think that there's another side to the issue of just having highly inconvenient. And I agree that it is inconvenient. I mean, I avoid coming into town when I know there's going to be a lot of people here, or I ride my bike or walk down. So I just think we need to be very cognizant that there's two sides to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Other counselors? Sorry, Julie?
I agree with Alan's statement. I do think we've made a lot of progress. Not all of it is obvious yet because we have a parking lot that hasn't been developed yet. We have another parking lot that is really shabby looking and about to get developed, the Hiawatha. Those lots will have a positive impact in reducing congestion, but we gotta wait, it doesn't happen overnight. At the same time, I think it really, and I appreciate Dave's comments too. I agree that we're still tipped too far in favor of tourism and money and not enough respect for residents. And I think there are some creative ideas that we could explore to try and help that problem. And I have an example. We all got, or city council got an email from someone who said that their disabled daughter had parked her car the night before the incline and it hadn't been removed by 5:30 in the morning. It wasn't really in anybody's way. And there was what, a $700 or $800 towing fee? I think we should do something about that. Maybe we could have a policy because it's very inconvenient. Can you imagine living on Ruxton and not being able to park your car? I think we need to tell people that if we're gonna, inconvenience you on Ruxton, or if your home is on Manitou Ave and you can't park there because of a special event, we're gonna let you park somewhere local, like at the high school parking lot or some parking lot for free. And we're going to give you a free Uber pass that you can Uber as many times as you need to that day from your house on Ruxton to your car. So that you can go and drive and get your, go to the doctor, get your grocery shopping done, all the things that us locals who live downtown don't do on the weekends when we know we're never going to be able to park again unless we're lucky enough to be in a RPP, parking street. So that way the people who live on Ruxton don't have to feel quite as inconvenienced. I mean, they still have to, get the Uber to get their car, but at least we're trying to accommodate them. I also don't think that we should be setting our tow truck company, using a tow truck company that's going to charge $700 or $800 to someone who gets their car towed. I just think that's outrageous. We can have the cars towed to the Public Works, building, or we can have them, towed wherever to one of our own lots and just put the boot on so that they can't drive away. In other words, we want to solve the problem of having the vehicles out of the way, but we don't have to inconvenience people to the point where our local residents are being charged $800 as a punishment if they screw up and they don't move their car on time. So, I mean, that's just one little example. I'm sure there are many others, but I think we need to look at really redefining priorities. It doesn't mean we were not going to have the marathon, but we need to make accommodations for the people who are most inconvenienced. And if we are more proactive in that way, then maybe the residents will feel that they're being given a little more respect and it's not just all about the tourists.
Thank you. Natalie?
I think this was a great one to start with because, for one, I think pretty quickly that first line of enhancing communication, and this says events and resources, but ultimately communication between all the different groups that are working on this, so that whenever staff feels overwhelmed, I think it's really important to realize that this plan is for the entire, Manitou community, and it isn't up to the city alone to solve these problems, and that we can, once the city's doing it at capacity, other groups, other organizations need to step up. And so obviously with economic development, we already have a variety of groups working on it. And when it comes to things like sustainable tourism, I'm, liaison to the chamber board. And so I know they're working on a sustainable tourism plan. I know they got a grant from the state to pay for that. I know that I'm going to GovCon tomorrow, which is kind of the governor's conference on sort of those chamber visitor bureau organizations. And last year when I went, 99% of the programs were around sustainable tourism. The state just launched a sustainable tourism toolkit that they just completed over the course of the last 2 years. And so I think there's a ton
ton going on around this right now. And so I think it's a perfect time for us to jump in and utilize everything that's out there. But things are happening right now around that, and it's happening internationally, but it's happening statewide. And so, and again, it's not up to the city and the city staff alone to tackle this. And so I'm glad we launched with this one.
Thank you. Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. It's really great to be here with the Planning Commission having these discussions. And I appreciate this plethora of information. This is really awesome. So, you know, Colorado Springs and our outlying regions are just growing exponentially, you know, and we don't have a lot of control over that. So we're going to continue to see, I think, an influx of more tourists at a time when our population is starting to decrease a little bit and we're a little older. But with regards to economic development and tourism, I like to look at what specifically is it about the tourists coming into our community, because we're a tourist community, that really impacts the residents in the most negative ways, right? And I think slide 26 of all the slides in here really points that out. People are worried about the environment and sustainability and air pollution, and they're worried about traffic and parking. And so I remember when I was first elected to council, and I was very green and inexperienced and had this long list of passion projects that we were just going to, you know, get done. And the reality of it is things take time and money and resources, and darn it, we get to work sometimes with regional partners who might have other ideas than we do. Like, I appreciate Commissioner Delwich bringing up the incline for 4 years. 2025 will mark my 5th year of advocating that we put the incline not only on a reservation system, but a reservation tied to paid parking. And I'm humbled that, you know, it takes so long. I think that's another thing. The residents are frustrated, and I understand it. Why is it taking so long, right? And it takes as long as it takes. And I'll add that I really appreciate the slides where you asked for staff interaction, and they were talking about their ability to do some short-term goals versus some long-term goals. I see that council having that exact same, and possibly even our boards, commissions, and committees, when they have turnover, that a city council term is 4 years and mayoral term is 2 years. And even though people get reelected, you have that turnover. And so we're trying to get these short-term goals that we can get done and say, this is what we're doing. And hopefully when we knit this all together, because even though we have these 7 things, separated out, we all know that they're all interrelated. At the end of the day, when you influence one, you're influencing the other. The goal is at the end of the day to do our best job of influencing both. Yes, we want the tourists to have this great experience from parking remotely at our new parking lot and being shuttled in on our free shuttle. And yes, residents, we will have a decrease in the congestion and the pollution in downtown Manitou. And so I think part of it for me is making sure that we continue to be extremely transparent with what we're trying to accomplish and continually communicate with the public about, this is what we are moving toward. And I do really appreciate Commissioner Delwich. Sometimes I forget how much work we have accomplished. And, when most of this council got elected, within 2 months, we were in a global pandemic. So I just really liked the reminder that we've continued to grow and do some great things for this community, despite some pretty amazing things happening and staff turnover and all that. So I remain confident and positive, but I also, the reality is there that I think the Pollyanna in me really feels that if we continue to work on these projects where we're affecting one, we're going to affect the other in positive ways. And again, I think the parking and the traffic is huge. That's the number one thing I hear. And also, I'll also say, even though we're a small community, each different ward or different area of town has their own crosses to bear, for any better term, right? So while we all have a collective conscious of what we want the town to look like, sometimes we have very different experiences, right? I don't live on Roxton, but boy, I hear a lot about, the traffic up there, and so on and so forth. So sometimes it feels like a big town because we feel kind of like separated. And I think we need to come back together more. And this Plan Manitou certainly helps us work in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. See, anybody on council that didn't speak? I guess not. I think these comments are good. And a lot of these things, in particular, some things that council members have said, these are pointing at programs and initiatives that we've undertaken and staff's working on now. So I would say the ball's in play on a lot of this stuff. I guess in listening to other people, I'm struck by a comment that Henry David Thoreau was famous for, and he said, simplify, simplify, simplify. And I think maybe we're at a point here where we've got a great many complex things, and we're going to have to look for a simple way to do things in some cases. Okay, let's go on to the next topic. Natural environment sustainability. Okay, this time let's have city council go first. Any councilors would like to speak to this? To start off? Well, maybe we're bashful. Let's let the planning commission go first.
So I participated in a couple of these roundtable discussions on this one. Then the different people in different groups I was with, the real fear of wildfires was one of the hot topics in this group, and what we can be doing, what more we can be doing and might need to do as a community to work to get out deadwood out of the, all the open spaces. And I know we're making some progress there, but also thinking about ways people were really feeling the pinch of homeowners insurance and how homeowners insurances are being driven up really by the natural environment we live in. And so I got into a number of discussions with people asking, are there things that as a city we could do to help band together and implement that might help stabilize or drive down some of these increases that people are seeing. And I think up in Cedar Heights, they have had some success with that, with some of the, things that they're doing in terms of enforcing deadwood, weed removal, cutting trees back from houses so that they're not as vulnerable to fire jumping. So that was just one thing that really struck me, was how many people were interested in that now. And I think it really is one of the main things that's driven by the homeowners insurance is going up or being eliminated.
If I could vote on which screen for your question, I would prefer the first one, the question of the week being displayed next. I think this is extremely important. We can talk about tourism and traffic and infrastructure all day long, but if we don't have a town, we don't have a town. If you look up on Ruxton Valley, for example, if you really look at the trees, I mean, they're hurting. The forest is dying slowly around us. And if there's a fire, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So I really never really understood, or hope for, maybe I should say, why we don't have like Inman Trail should be 50 yards wide around the city, for example. And Cedar Heights actually won awards for their fire mitigation because was it the Waldo fire that went right by them? There was like 50 yards by rule from the back of any house to where the real forest was. It was just nothing but flat land. And that fire went right by and literally nothing burnt in Cedar Heights. If we have a major fire, and it's probably going to come up in Ruxton Valley, in my opinion, just because of the homelessness and so forth, we're going to be hurting.
I just want to echo what Commissioner Casey said. I know personally, I've heard the word defensible space. I think a lot of us have heard that, and we try to take our own measures with our own property, but looking around us, honestly, I got to say, what would it do? Because I'm looking right down into a canyon, overgrown. I wish I could go down there personally. I don't have the time or the strength or energy to do it myself, but here I am in the backyard cutting some trees down or limbs to try to make defensible space. And all around us, I think, is a lot of stuff that needs to be mitigated. That's just my perspective.
Looks like it's back to city council. Council, anybody? Okay, I can mention a couple things about, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Judith, you go ahead.
Well, this may be a little tiny bit off topic, but we're talking about priorities here. And obviously the Maslow's hierarchy of, community government is always the health, safety, and welfare of our residents, our tourists, our students that come to school, our wildlife, all of that as we make these decisions. So when I look at our natural environment, our natural and built environment, I do want to say one of the things that I want to emphasize is City Council, Planning Commission, our community did this tremendous thing, and we passed the Land Use Development Code. And in it, I think it really represents our communities striving to keep Manitou a unique community, while also understanding that we have these other issues to deal with. And so I just hope that we can honor the work that was done. And so when we're looking at how we want to develop our natural environment and our built environment, that we look to that code and honor that code and the spirit in which it was developed. So that's one of those things that I'll be looking at in the next few years.
Thank you, Judith. I'll mention about 3 weeks ago, the Colorado Municipal League and Colorado counties had a big Zoom meeting statewide addressing fire insurability rates. And there were examples given by places, Durango and Steamboat Springs were a couple of the areas that had been pretty proactive, and they'd done a lot to do fire mitigation and then to give their communities defensible space. What wasn't quite as clear is, did that help them with their fire insurance rates? Well, yes, it did, but in some cases, the results seem to be like the rate, it didn't go up as much, but rates are still going up. So, I mean, it's a statewide problem, but it's particularly acute for places like Manitou, where we're built up, and we love it, and we want to be close to the forest. And the danger is that we're close to the forest, and there's that fire. So I think that's a continuing problem that we'll have to look at in the coming years. And when I say I know that there's sentiment from other communities, Green Mountain Falls, El Paso County. There are people in those governments who would be, they've expressed an interest in working with Manitou, trying to come up with, basically, I think it goes to the State House, and we have to, the place to start the firefighting is in the State House, I guess, or at least relative to insurance rates. There's a lot to be learned there, but that is a continuing problem. I think, Carrie, you had some really good remarks on that. Also Mike, especially. So, okay. Anyone else from council on natural environment? Okay, let's go to the next topic, please. Transportation infrastructure and mobility. That seems like city council should be able to start that discussion. Judith, you're smirking. I think you've got a lot to say. Why don't you kick us off?
Well, I think that this is an area that, if you ask anyone, tourist or resident, what's the biggest problem in town? Typically, you will quite often hear traffic congestion, environmental pollution from exhaust. And to me, and again, it's the Pollyanna in me. It's one of those things that I think is one of the easiest not necessarily, financially easy, but from a conceptual standpoint to address. I mean, obviously, we need robust, reliable shuttle service in our town. We need to really, promote our mass transit and grow that. We are already really looking at, remote parking lots at the east and west areas of town. Promoting the incline being on a prepaid parking, reservation. All these things that we've been, really working on for years, to me, are really starting to manifest. Can we be doing more? Absolutely. Can we be doing it faster? I think so. I think, and I voted against this. I voted against the parking enterprise. And when I voted against the parking enterprise, I was concerned because I didn't want that to turn into a 3-story parking lot, right? I was really kind of concerned. But we have a parking enterprise, and we have staff. We have a really amazing mobility and parking board. So to me, it's one of those things I kind of beat my head against the wall because of all of the things. When you think about flood mitigation, fire mitigation, all this other stuff, I'm like, parking. I mean, come on. I mean, to me, it's just, it's a no-brainer with regards to the resources we have. And I will say that I'm so proud of this council for voting to move forward with the Dillon and the car wash combined mobility hub in the URA. That's an economic boom to the URA. It's going to really help us with our remote parking lots. And if we can work with our regional partners on our big tourist attractions to work with us, I think we have a winning plan, and I can't wait to see it implemented. I do want to see us do a lot more with mass transit and shuttle service. Thank you.
Any other counselors? Okay, just briefly, I would reiterate that Judith's comments. We have been doing a lot. I think we're on track with a number of things. It's a thorny problem. We continue to experiment. The outlying satellite parking lot seems to be a good project, and we're dealing with transit, but there's no quick answers. And we'd like to move fast. I mean, sometimes I think a city doesn't need a city council. It needs a blue fairy godmother. Blue fairy godmother says bibbidi bobbidi boo and everything's good. In the real world, it takes time. And we remind ourselves that, and we experiment, and we move as quickly as we can, but it takes time to find the money and do the plans and et cetera. So patience is a virtue in government. Okay, let's hand this one off to the Planning Commission.
Anybody want to weigh in on this? Megan?
Sure. I think this one gets down to an intersection of our risk of not having a city anymore because it burns down, parking, and safety, right? So the more parking we build in Manitou, the more we induce demand. We induce people to come here and park. And the more deadly it becomes if we have to evacuate in a fire. And so I would advocate that we deprioritize building more parking because it puts those of us living in Manitou and visiting Manitou at risk of a deadly fire like the wildfire in California in Paradise, which is very much like Manitou in that we have 3 exits. And they had 3 exits and they had 84 people die because they couldn't get out of those bottlenecks. More people we bring in to park here, the more we're going to be dying trying to get out. So I would advocate that we really deprioritize parking. We bring people in on shuttles more, and we just don't keep building surface parking. We also have, we're demolishing affordable housing to build parking. And so that's creating an imbalance in terms of who are we serving when we talk about who are we prioritizing in our actions and decisions.
David?
Megan and I are architects and planners, and it seems counterintuitive. We've got a congestion problem. Let's provide more parking. I echo what she said. You build more parking, you invite more cars, which means more congestion. Manitou has done and from my point of view, a great job with the shuttles and public transportation. I suppose the city buses could run more frequently, but and Manitou has this phenomenal advantage of being eminently walkable. That in the Western United States is very rare. And it's just the way we're built and circumscribed on three sides. So yeah, I was disappointed to see that let's put our focus on walkability and alternate forms of transportation rather than the building parking.
I have a question for both of you, because I agree, shuttling people in is a wonderful solution, but where do we shuttle them from? I kind of was of the opinion that having parking on the east and west ends would be a way to keep the congestion out of the core, where the real problem is. Where I live, it's not the same challenge. And so where do we want to stage the shuttles that bring people to Manitou? Because they have to, in a perfect world, everybody would take, fly in or take a train or something, but this is America. It's too easy to drive. It's too easy to have cars. And we're not quite at the place where we have lots of reliable, consistent public transportation. I spent some time in Europe this summer, and it's amazing that big cities you can get around in 20 minutes in Paris or in Amsterdam. And, to get down to Tejon and Colorado Avenue on public transportation, you have to book a half day. So it's going to take some time, but what is the solution? Where do we stage? That's my question to you.
I think we have an opportunity to make a lot of money for the schools with school parking. I mean, on the weekends, that's when the pressure and the demand for parking is greatest. And there was some selling of parking for the marathon and in a sense. So there's kids out there volunteering and making money for their cross-country team or whatever. But I don't believe they were selling parking on Labor Day weekend when all of Manitou Avenue was a moving parking lot. So a little more coordination there, I think would be a great opportunity for revenue too.
I don't know what the plan is for the Dillon property, but one thought would be for that to be employee parking. If a lot of employees didn't park in downtown Manitou, that would, because those are the people that know the issue. Imagine somebody coming down the street in a van from Des Moines, never been here before, is going to go right to the heart of the city. That's just natural. So if the remote lots were employee parking and obviously enforced by employers to keep people out, that could take a load off the local closer parking lots. And I'm guilty too. I'm guilty.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, because, it would have to be forced, because, we did experiment, I think, a lot last summer. We had part of Hiawatha was for employee parking. We had the lot in front of the 7-Eleven building was employee parking, and they were never used. And so they discontinued it because, they just weren't being used. And so it's like, there has to be some kind of paradigm shift that we're not there yet, and cars are too cheap. It's too easy. But I agree. I think it'd be great if we could get everybody, just put a wall around the whole, Manitou Avenue at both ends and Serpentine and yeah, right. So it's, incremental. We're getting there, it just takes time. I mean, think before we had RPPs where, if you lived on Ruxton or anywhere in the downtown core, you would not move your car on the weekends or the summer in general. Sandy?
It looks like planning commissioners have spoken. Did you have a follow-on comment, Judith?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on rolling around these ideas. For example, putting employee parking over, where that, the Dillon Micromobility, hub will be. And I think part of we have this great idea, like I'll have a great idea and then I'll run it by people and they will kind of deconstruct it and go, well, what about our shift workers that don't get out of the bar till 2 a.m. and are we going to have an employee at the Dillon parking lot when it's 2 a.m. and what are the safety issues and it's dark. And so, I mean, I think these are great ideas and I'll say this for the residents too, they'll come with these great ideas, but then know that, they have to, and Denise is really good at reminding us, they all have to be vetted out and we have to look at all of the little particulars that go into making that kind of decision. So while that's a great idea, I want to make sure that, like, if that was an idea we were going to go with, that we vet it and make sure that our employees are safe. They have safe transportation at all hours of the day to get to their car, and there's, someone to help them into their car. So just those things that we think about as we, look at these different ideas. Thank you.
Very good. Well, both planning commissioners and city councilors have spoken to this, so let's move on to the next topic. Oh, I'm sorry. Natalie.
I was just, I just think it's interesting, like some of these conversations around diverse housing options. I just wonder, one, as someone who was on the land use commission, so I spent hundreds of hours creating that document. It is still a living document to me. I am comfortable adjusting it over time. This change is inevitable. But I don't know that Plan Manitou is going to help us understand what this community wants in terms of housing. And I don't know that it's just possible with this document, but I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, then, anything else on transportation? Okay, let's go to housing, neighborhoods, land use, and built environment. All right. Planning Commission, you want to start off on this one?
Sure. Anybody? David, go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna start just with, and John may be the expert on some of this. But in the time we've had these discussions and different comprehensive plans over the years, the notion of a grocery store keeps coming up. It keeps coming up. And the answer is always the same. And, I've talked to a few old timers that are even older than John, like maybe a generation older, but I know John grew up here or spent a lot of time at his grandparents. And what I've been told is before Safeway was there were 2 grocery stores in town and there was a hardware store. And once the Safeway came in, it just kind of, it was not competitive. It was not sustainable. And this is a phenomenon, not just in Manitou, but all over. So that's something that's aspirational, but it's really hard unless that Safeway closes. It's really hard to imagine any enterprise wanting to risk, and we've had little stores over the years and they can't survive. And so that's an opening comment on this topic. The other thing that, I think somewhere, one of the critical things is the need of affordable housing. And that is not even just nationwide, it's an international challenge, affordable housing. It's, you know, and, you know, we can nibble around the edges and do things, but in terms of Manitou with 5,000 people in a community, you know, a metropolitan area with 750 or 1 million people, whatever it is now, it's a regional problem. And I think regional solutions are how we're going to get there. How, you know, how we contribute it is still TBD. And, but I think these are two things that keep coming up, and it's just, they're very challenging.
Well, no, we do, if you can wait, we'll do the city council turn. It's easy enough. It's easy enough. Sorry. Okay. Back to you, Al.
I appreciate Alan and Natalie's comments. I have this recurring nightmare that I'm going to wake up someday and there'll be no one in my neighborhood anymore, except old white guys like me who bought a house when it was relatively inexpensive. And one of the pillars of the community really got me thinking when she suggested, hey, if we don't begin to address this now, well, her comment was that the community is going to die. I don't know about that, but I don't want it to see it become a group of old people like me. So I don't know what the answers are, but I think part of the answer could be, instead of building parking, build housing for teachers, city employees, police officers, people who frankly right now many cannot afford to live here. So we're this elite with a bunch of servants who commute in every day, and that's just not a good situation. But the main thing is to have a diversity of population so that you've got young families, you're filling your schools, et cetera, et cetera. And I wondered did you guys address demographic changes in looking out ahead?
I don't think we were running projections about, what the demographics of the community would look like going forward, but we did look at sort of the trends leading up to now. And so I think, to your point, it is sort of an aging population. And I think a lot of that, I think just based on other communities like yours that are, popular destinations for second homeowners, that sort of thing. It is, I think, there is a decrease in sort of the family age population, or the families with children. And to some extent, that's not unique here as much as a statewide, nationwide phenomenon, that people are having less kids, and there's more people in one-person households or two-person households. And so that's, I think, a bigger, broader thing that could inform, I think, housing decisions in terms of the types of housing that's developed and the types of housing that the community is trying to incentivize or attract. I think that can be a helpful data point for that going forward, is, who are we missing in the community, and what are those trends that we're missing out on with our current housing stock.
The last planning commission meeting was interesting in the couple takeaways from that is there's a strong rumor on the street that Manitou has always been anti-development. And in my world, I get questions like that all the time, and people tell me that they're frustrated, they can't get answers, nobody answers the phone, the paperwork is mountainous. And at the planning commission meeting last week, there was an opportunity to create affordable housing, and it wasn't well received. I think that's a good example of what I think is not welcoming to people that want to make change, I guess, in a nutshell. Another thing that came out of there that was interesting was those developers, and I don't know what their experience, I don't,
Getting into quasi judicial challenges.
I'm just, you want my opinion? That's what we're here for. So
Mike, we are, I think what you're speaking to is becoming, it's quasi judicial issue. So I'd ask you for your understanding on that. We can't really delve into that. If you could maybe,
all right, okay,
maybe if, think about this for a minute, maybe there's a philosophical way you can talk in a more abstract way that gets around.
okay.
That's
That's fine.
I
that's
don't know.
fine.
I mean, just
There was a complimentary beta test that came out of that meeting where
Mike, I'm going to have to ask you.
I'm
not
sorry to
I'm
interrupt,
just
but
kinda
I
concerned.
really feel it's important to interrupt because what's being said right now could really cause us some serious legal problems.
fine, I'll stop.
Because we are listening to something we're not supposed to hear. So with all due respect to Mike Casey, I really don't think we should have more discussion about this.
With all due respect, that's exactly what the mayor just said. So thank you.
Thank you. Judith? Well, let's see, I'm sorry. Did we have any other planning?
Yeah, I just had one other observation that, something that has been discussed is as a one way to at least preserve some of the I don't know that you can call it affordable, but the more attainable housing in town is if we revisit the appropriateness of having short-term rental businesses. And that has been something that has been discussed and is a potential area that we don't have to continue to invite more and more short-term rentals in town. We have an ordinance and it's fairly good. It was one of the first ones in the region, but we can even do more, and we can even stop considering having short-term rentals. It's a possibility. It's been sort of vetted with our planning commission attorney, and it is another area to look at.
I'll speak to that also. I know that in some communities, they're actually just reversing approvals on short-term rentals and just eliminating them in the community because they do feel that they have taken up so much of the housing stock. They're saying we're going to just eliminate them.
Some action items to consider on the affordable housing front include facilitating accessory dwelling units. And it's hard, a lot of the lots in the way we're built out in Manitou, but other communities are making that more easy to develop, but also providing pre-approved plans. We could consider that in Manitou, something that might be a fit in Manitou with our smaller lots, allowing for more greater density in our land use code, as well as providing more flexibility for multifamily buildings for height restrictions and building more housing, which was suggested, and allowing long-term residents in our motels again, which we've prevented. And we've lost kids from the schools and families from town who were on the margins there and using motels as a long-term residence. And so restricting that to only visitors is kind of doing the same thing, right? Do we block short-term rentals? How about we allow long-term rentals in the motels because they struggle to fill up in the winter and we could have families there? Some considerations.
Any more planning commissioners? Okay, we're done for now.
Okay, let's go ahead and hand this over to city council, and Julie was first, really. If you remember what you wanted to say, Julie, we'll start.
Thank you. I'll pass.
Okay, we'll come back to you then. Not sure who was first here. Nancy, why don't you go?
Yeah, this is an excellent discussion and I agree with David and Mike and you. I don't know your name. Sorry. Megan, is it Megan? Thank you. I think, like Drew said earlier, that transportation or mobility is a key aspect that we really need to look at to solve a whole bunch of problems within our city. I think that affordable housing and accessible housing, which is a higher criteria for, well, you don't have to have as low a rent for accessible housing. Anyway, is absolutely key and will solve a lot of problems for this city. And I think that it's another place where we really need to look at the balance, because I think that our land use code is conflicts with affordable housing. It's a system that conflicts. I think that our historic preservation code conflicts with historic preservation, and I quite honestly worry about the future of our city and our values as a city if we have a bunch of David Armstrongs within the city. By that, I mean, seasoned white men who own all the old housing stock in the city. But anyway, so that I just think affordable housing is a touchstone that we need to prioritize. Thanks.
Thank you. Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is a tough one. I think it's really hard for a community of this size with the limitations that we have, trying to be everything to everyone. It's really challenging. And I have had an opportunity as a volunteer. I'm a volunteer crossing guard at the elementary school. I did that for 2 years, and my job is on hiatus while the Carnegie Library is being built. But I will go back to that, and I've learned a lot. I got a chance to be in committee meetings with the principal and talk to parents. And my daughter lives here, and she has 2 kids, and so I'm really getting I'm knowledgeable about what the challenges are, because when we think about cars coming in and traffic coming in, we often think about tourists and events. But we also have, and Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong, at least 50%, if not a little greater, of all of our school children are choiced in. So we have those cars coming in because those parents either can't afford to live here, don't want to live here, there's no housing to be had. And so we have that. And so in talking to these parents, it's not just affordable housing. If it were just that, we'd have to just tackle that. What is affordable housing? I don't even know. I mean, when I look at Colorado Springs and the buildings they are putting up, some of them very unattractive. A studio apartment is $1,500. I don't know if you consider that affordable housing. I sure as heck don't. But these parents were telling me it's not just housing. It's, I have to drive out of Manitou if I live there to go to my job because there's no work here. Daycare, that was like one of the major things, is affordable daycare. We can't just attract young people with families just by saying, look, we just built you some affordable housing. But now that you live here, the grocery stores in Colorado Springs, the pharmacies in Colorado Springs, the hardware stores in Colorado Springs. And I just bought an e-bike in April. And my goal is to make at least 75 to 80% of my trips on my e-bike to Safeway. I mean, I live on Becker's Lane. And let me tell you, I've learned that it's scary out there as a 66-year-old woman on an e-bike because people buzz you, they drive around you. I mean, it's scary. So I have to literally plan my trips around when there's not a lot of traffic. So there's so many moving pieces. I really appreciate Megan bringing up accessory dwelling units. When this was first brought to council years ago, I was one of the skeptics. I was skeptical, but I really think that we need to revisit this and perhaps pick a community where we do a pilot, because if we can't put up a mass amount of affordable housing and our people don't have access to jobs here, affordable daycare here, and all those amenities that are basic, like a grocery store, we could at least help people age in place and maybe attract their young people to come in that way. And so I'm more open to having that conversation. And I think I think that needs to be something that we really bring back in 2025 and have another look at. Thanks.
Thank you. Other counselors? Natalie?
I just wanted to make a correction. It's not that we don't have affordable daycare. I don't think we have any daycare.
Thank you.
Did you have anything else, Natalie? That's okay. Julie, did you?
Well, yeah, we already allow ADUs, there's already a code on ADUs, as you all probably know. We could look at revising it so that it's, doesn't have any setbacks, it doesn't have any parking requirements, you just, whatever, just figure it out yourself. About that, we could loosen it, but we already have ADUs. I'm interested though, because I'm trying to remember, and this is what Megan brought up. I thought we passed an ordinance that allowed or encouraged the hotels to provide housing, longer term housing during off season. Didn't we have something like that? I don't know if that came up when I was on the planning commission or if that came up during the last 4.5 years, but.
I believe Alan has an answer on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in our ordinance now but it's limited to 20% of the occupancy days of the facility. And I mean, that could be adjusted, but right now it's like, besides the limit on the percentage, there's requirements for, having a second sink, and that went back and forth both at the commission and at the council level when that was adopted. Like you had to have a separate area to wash diapers or to wash vegetables, something like that.
Yeah.
The discussion, but that has been used. I think we have about 4 instances of it now that actually have conditional uses in former motels. An example, the Western Cabins has been operating that way for at least 15 years.
So is that an option? I mean, is that something where, if in fact it would be affordable, I have no idea, because I've seen the prices in Colorado Springs too. And I don't consider $1,600 a month affordable. I mean, I guess it depends on who you're talking about, because there's no legal definition of affordable. It's sort of like putting natural food on your, Cheetos. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. But I just was wondering if there's a desire to increase long-term housing by taking over some of those hotel units, then that might be something that we should consider as a potential code amendment, without it negatively impacting anything, at least, immediately, I don't see any obvious negative impact. I would imagine that the hotel owners would only be interested in pursuing it if it was financially feasible, but if they're already using it somewhat, maybe that's something we could look into potentially increasing. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think we did have one case in probably the last 4 years where one of the more modern hotels actually hired an attorney to argue for having that long term. And, their approach was just basically someone could have a long-term residence in a room. And the concern was safety. Are they going to have hot plates or different ways to cook? And those are I think it was rejected. I can't remember if it made it all the way to council, but it certainly was discussed in the planning commission.
Well, yeah,
And the answer of the planning commission was, we don't make laws, we enforce the code. If you want to do something, talk to city council.
And are there hotels that have actually gone ahead and done the renovations so that they comply with the law about the two sinks and that kind of thing? Do we have places in town that have actually done that?
Yeah, yeah, and some of them have been successes and some of them not so much. I think I can think of at least 4 different places that have them, and some of them go back fairly far. And one seems to be relatively successful and stable. One of them seems to have lots of complaints and problems and police calls. And couple of them, I just don't know. I think one of them basically shut down because they just didn't maintain the structures.
So that's.
But
yeah.
it's definitely in the code.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think that's worth looking at if it's something that would help the owners of the hotels and something that would provide longer term housing. I don't know how much these places would charge, but I would guess it would be less expensive to have, a little 2-room apartment inside a hotel than it would be to rent a place, but I don't know what they've been charging. But I just think that's a good idea, Megan, and I was curious to learn more about how that's been used so far.
Yeah, and just one more thing, the one hotel that tried to get consideration, their argument was just what Megan said, is that they don't have occupancy in a lot of the months where they could rent long-term. And they're suffering, they're barely hanging on because of that. And so it's certainly something to consider.
Thank you. Any other counselors want to speak to housing? I think everybody's had a chance. With that, I would suggest we take a 15-minute break. I think we've got 3 more topics. We come back, I would guess we could probably finish up in an hour or maybe not a whole lot more. Although I think it's been a good discussion. So if there's no objections, we'll take a 15-minute break. Okay, let's get started again. And I think our next topic is arts, culture, and historic resources. Is that correct, gentlemen? Okay. Who started last? I think last time we had planning commission start. So let's start with this with city council. Oh, Nancy. Okay, shoot, go. Okay.
Yeah, this is an example, I think, of where what was talked about earlier, where the community has really stepped up to assist. I think that the city has enabled the community through the match dollars to really take care of just a lot of this stuff. So I'm kind of encouraged by both the community and the city in this regard.
Thank you. Other counselors? Natalie?
I feel like with match and other opportunities, I think individual artists are being paid in a better way than they historically have been. But I do think that we've lost some of our galleries and other businesses. And so I think there's some interesting things happening in how we're supporting the arts and then what we're simultaneously losing. So I think we're gaining ground in a whole variety of ways, but I think we need to track what's not quite working out for us.
Okay. Julie, do you? Okay, or all right. Okay. Judith? Anything or?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'll add, it seems like match has helped quite a bit. And I think, people feel empowered. I think overall that seems to be doing okay. So let's hand this off to planning.
Anybody? Carrie?
I'm going to just put on my Heritage Center hat here briefly. So I think that from a perspective of having been on the board of the Heritage Center, the importance of not only match and the community support, but the support of council and the support of others in the community that really helped, specifically here Heritage Center this last year. The funds that we needed to renovate the building, get everything up and operational, and to preserve the heritage of Manitou by, having that new fabulous building. But it comes down to the support of the community, the letters that, many of you have written in support when we put in for a grant, enabled the Heritage Center to get $30,000 from El Pomar this year. And I think that match has been and the support of the community has been a real success for at least the historic aspect of in my little purview.
Anyone else?
Okay, let's move right along then. I guess education, health, and public services. Planning Commission, would you like to go first?
Would anybody like to Carrie again?
In the roundtables we were at, there's a lot of support for the rec center and the work that's being done on the rec center, and the hope that somehow in the future the funding can be found to renovate the rec center in a more complete way than just doing bathrooms, etc. But I think that the community that goes to the rec center, I work out there twice a week, really feels that it's an important part of the community. I think also when we look at other things that the community could really need, the other thing that came up in the roundtables was the affordable somewhere to have childcare. And this has been spoken on a number of ways, but that was one of the things that came up in the roundtable that seemed as a great need. I don't know how it's solved, but that was just the feedback.
Anybody else? David?
It strikes me, and our consultants mentioned this actually several times in their lead-in. Some things are great to have, and they're just not practical. Now, how do those things fit into the plan? And I'm wondering if, for example, affordable childcare isn't beyond our capacities as a community, or it's certainly not something that city council can just legislate, right? I don't know. So somehow, at some point, there needs to be a winnowing here of what's, well, that's the prioritization that you guys talked about at this.
Anybody else? Okay.
Okay, ball goes to council. Nancy?
Yeah, I would say that Hiawatha Gardens, the design for that would address a number of these issues. Because the use of that is planned to be a community center, which would be address potentially services for seniors, some community amenities, better information sharing, education, venue, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm still hoping that we will realize Hiawatha Gardens as a community center. Thanks.
Judith?
I just want to appreciate what Dave Armstrong just said. There's so many things we want and so many things that are not practical. And so I'm going to be the bad guy here and say, I just don't see Manitou being able to handle the local police dispatch services. I just don't see that happening. And I do think that we do still need to keep looking at Hiawatha. My concern is I want to make sure that we are using our resources. And if these things that we're trying to do have these really unrealistic price tags on it, I think we need to be fiscally responsible too. We want to provide these things, but we need to look at what the cost is to for example, finish Hiawatha Gardens if we keep it in the floodplain, and also what the environmental impact of that would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalie?
I think with this question, just as I said, staff doesn't have to do everything. I do think additionally, we do need to finish some of the projects we're working on. And so I just don't know the best way to start prioritizing future projects, but simultaneously communicate that we need to finish some of the things that we've committed to first, potentially. So just throwing that out there too.
Thank you. Julie, did you?
I just said staff would appreciate that, because we're doing so many projects and we're probably maxing out, staff's capacity, and we're very lucky that everyone is like gung ho and giving it their all, and Denise is leading it. She works, 7 days a week. It's fine if y'all want to, decide in 3 years, what do you think would be the best thing to work on, and try to guess that now. But I don't see us starting anything major and new, because there's no people to do the work. We don't have that kind of money.
I think those are particularly good points that you made, Natalie and Julie. And in one of the slides towards the end here, it mentions that some of the feedback from the city's department head and staff is that we should catch up with some of the deferred things we've done, and we should finish the projects that are that we have underway. I think when most of us on council here when we took the job, we found ourselves faced with a lot of big projects. I mean, there was the Hiawatha Gardens that was under discussion. There was a group that was supporting that. Shortly, it was March 2020, right when COVID, the week after COVID hit, we found out the library was going to have to close. And the water plant had problems. I mean, every time we turned around, there was something wrong. And if you look in the 4 years since then, a lot of things have been addressed. And in some cases, we had to find the money to do it. The library was an example. Finding sufficient funding for the water tank and the water treatment plant, all of that has been it was a challenge. So we went through funding, design, and implement, and now we're in implementation on some of those projects. I think we really need to finish what we've got on the plate before we take on any other big projects. I think the aspiring to try to do too much would mean that we would end up doing too little. And we're doing a lot, and I think we can complete those things. So I would be cautious as to taking on more projects. Judith, please.
May I just do a follow-up comment? Because I totally agree with you, and you forgot the police department, the city hall, and then the driveway of the fire department caved in, and then, on and the pool. How many times have we done the pool? I mean, all of these surprises. But I'm glad we're having this conversation because we're going to get a Higginbotham Park master plan presented at some point in the near future. And I just want to put in a plug for, we've been phasing in things like, for example, Soda Springs Park. We have these 3 phases or 4 phases now. And what I would also love to see is all of the phases of one project finished before I don't mind if we look at the plan, approve the plan, and really encourage people to get some outside funding and get, grants and those kinds of things going. But I totally agree that we need to get, it's great to get a shovel in the ground, and it's also time to get these things off the books. Thank you.
No, and that was good. Yeah. I mean, redoing the police station was huge, the city hall. And then as you were mentioning that, you reminded me of the ambulance service. And that was another time. I mean, I think council, we had one problem. We turned around the next day or the next week, and it seemed like the firemen went here telling us that that the ambulance service that we were using was not reliable. They had to take it over, and they were asking for $700,000, that was a huge amount of money then. But we got them 650, so that was good. Thank you. Thank you for the reminders. Council, anything more on this topic, or should we can push on? Let's push on. Let's go to the next category. Municipal governance and community engagement. Maybe this is something council should listen to first. So let's have planning commission kick off.
Anybody like to weigh in on this? Mike.
I think the city does a pretty good job of communicating what's going on in events and so forth. And it's just human nature that you can't encourage people to do what they don't normally do, I guess. In other words, the people that are involved know where to find the answers, but the people that aren't involved are surprised that there's even a Manitou website. The Citizens Academy, I thought, was excellent. And that's a great community. It's the definition of community engagement. So if anybody hasn't done that, I'd highly recommend it. It was excellent. And I think that should be publicized more and maybe have a larger class. It's worth it.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just looking at those bullet points, and the first one, the renew focus on in-person meetings. I think that's a great thing to think about, but I'd also like to state my appreciation for the fact that we have ability for anybody in the community to attend a meeting remotely. I think it's really contributed to a lot of information getting out to the community. And I'd like to see us continue to do that. And I think I mentioned to the city administrator the other day, when we have budget, something that would be really cool to do would be to implement something like what they did with PPRTA, where they have a much more, a voice activated camera that, like this meeting right now, if you're watching it at home, you're seeing the presentation and you're seeing a bunch of little dots and you hear someone speak and you try to figure out who it is. With this new capability they have at the PPACG, PPRTA building, while someone's speaking, the focus is on that person. So you really can see their angst or their joy or whatever. It's really great. So when it fits in our budget, I think that would be a great goal. Megan.
I think just on the community engagement piece, we are all part of this demographic shift right here. The 3% population loss and the aging of our community. And, I think it's important to think about who's not here, who cannot be here, who cannot, afford the luxury of attending and participating and joining committees and et cetera. And those are people who can't afford to live in Manitou anymore. And so affordable housing is not going to be a top of mind for us because we generally own our houses. We can afford them because we bought them a long time ago, and it's not the priority for us. So I would just encourage us to kind of look at who's not in the room and always be thinking about how to include those voices and reach out to them. And they very often don't live in Manitou anymore because we are a very white, older community and becoming kind of exclusive in that way. And so that's not the Manitou that I want to continue to be. I'd like us to be more of an inclusive community, and part of the way to do that is to include more voices in our community engagement.
I kind of want to echo again, Commissioner Day's comment there. I think speaking from a younger demographic, it's great that we're pushing to electronic forms of communication, social media, but I can tell you that when you're getting pinged left and right all day constantly, it just becomes white noise and you tune it out. And I'm in really no way advocating for a gigantic electronic billboard, but I know, speaking from experience, if I was driving home and I saw something that said planning meeting tonight, 6 p.m., City Hall, that might actually trigger me to, well, I would go anyway because I'm on the planning commission. But I'm just saying it might trigger some more community engagement. That's all. Just another way to kind of get through to people through all the noise in their lives, that we get. And I think that could help. So.
I think it's a great idea. I think that should be pursued because it's just a great form of communication. It is one way, but at least you're getting the word out there.
It sounds to me like, as far as communication is concerned, it's about time for this administration and this city council. It's, I guess, pretty much the same council for quite a period of time here, to provide two lists, maybe through the bulletin, of what you have accomplished and what is still underway, instead of, not instead of, to take a victory lap is what I'm thinking.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Yes. And what I will mention here for the last, I think, certainly 3, maybe 4 years, in January, the city's put together an annual report which states what we've done. I mean, and some of it's big projects and some of it's things like how many miles of sewer pipe we rode or routed and that kind of thing. How many, what's that?
How many paper clips we bought?
Well,
There's all kinds of random stuff in there. I'm thinking, is this really a priority to tell us? My goodness, but it is, it gets minutia.
But there are some, I mean, certainly things, yeah, and some big projects. So thank you. And we have some of those underway. And Denise has a pretty ambitious project list that she's working on that are things that that we have started this year or that she's, ram running. Great. Thanks. Back to planning then. So you start, okay, I was responding to David. I didn't mean to preempt. If there's any other planning commissioners who'd like to speak to this. Okay, so let's go to council. Council. We're talking about municipal governance and community engagement. Julie.
Well, like probably many of you, I've received plenty of complaints over the years about what Alan was explaining, that anyone watching us right now gets to see on the top of the green strip on the screen there. See how tiny that is with all these little black dots? I guess those are supposed to be people. And so, you know, I've gotten 2 texts tonight already asking me, who said this and who said that? Because we don't announce who we are when we're I mean, sometimes you might say Julie and then they'll say, oh, Julie. But, you know, otherwise, if you miss that, so I would love us to see, I think we can improve things if we get the kind of system that Alan is talking about. I don't know if it costs $1 million a year to have someone who can actually use a camera and not just have this like blob of people sitting around, but I think that would help increase the interest because the few times I've watched online, it's boring when you can't see anybody and you're not even sure who's talking. I just think that would really increase our ability, our efforts to communicate with folks, and hopefully they would engage in that. But otherwise, I think we're doing a really good job. I think it's great that we have our stuff on YouTube and we're working closely to get the ADA compliance in place, which also has to do with communicating with our public and making our meetings accessible to them. So I'd give ourselves good grades in this department.
Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. I would also just like to put in a plug for the most recent city survey. I think it was year 3 that we were on council the first time around, and you were using the same survey, and this council said, you know, we're ready to have a really in-depth survey with lots more questions that we can actually use to affect policy. And, you know, like, for example, one of the questions on the old survey was, you know, name one thing you like about Manitou. Well, I think we can all do that. But as a council, we said, you know, we need some really in-depth data, and some of it may be hard to look at, including the stuff, you know, the questions about how city council can be a better council. But I do give staff kudos for rising to the call. The then PIO officer, Alex Treffry, really worked together to make what I thought was a really good survey that had data that we could use to affect policy. So kudos on that one, Denise.
Thank you, Nancy.
One of my questions was associated with that, and that is, has the consultants taken that community survey and done an analysis to see what the overlaps and gaps are with this?
Yes, we have. I think based on the nature of some of the questions we're asking, they can be pretty specific and tied to the plan, but definitely I think the community survey in terms of, you know, participation, it's a big number. And so I think that we use that as sort of a helpful data point for sure, especially because it's a big number. It's really is capturing a good chunk of sort of the community sentiment on a lot of these issues.
Natalie?
I really liked the explore framework for coordinating volunteer groups and community members based on topic areas. I think one, I know that can be incredibly time intensive for staff if staff were to be the lead on that. So I'm not suggesting that. But I do think that some of the things that are going to come up, like I don't know, like the food board, right? I think a food board could form without needing support from city staff in order to make that happen. And so I'm just thinking of different ways that we can kind of activate folks that are passionate about certain things in areas that maybe don't require a lot of city support. And if there's a way to kind of make that happen through the plan.
Thank you. Other counselors? Okay, I think I'm pretty much in agreement with what the other sentiments the council's expressed. Yeah, I am, I mentioned this earlier this evening, concerned about how much work we can expect staff to address. And I think, you know, right now we've got some big projects in the works. I would be comfortable. I would prefer that we get those projects done. We do have some financial reserves. And I'd like to button some of those projects up, the water tank, water treatment plant, the library, and repairs out at the swimming pool. And I think part of our success is that we were able to take a project at a time and get those going. And I give staff a lot of credit for that. I guess one of the great challenges now is for us to prioritize things with the understanding that we can't, expect miracles out of staff. And then there's a funding cycle. Last year, I think we brought in over $5.1 million in grants. When I say we, it was mostly city staff. But that was an extraordinarily good year. And I think we probably won't have a year like that for for several more years, maybe. We have to kind of stand back and take our turn at the grant table. So that is a thought going forward. So we may have to throttle back a little bit, but if we can keep a good rhythm and a steady pace, I think we'll be successful. I believe that's the last topic area. So I hope that some of what we gave you is useful. Again, it's my big concern now is how do we prioritize this? That's been a theme that's come up a couple of times. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I did. Honestly, I guess, first of all, thank you guys for such a thorough discussion. And I think one of our takeaways we were chatting about during the break was just sort of the level of consensus that we're hearing from you on a lot of these topics. And that's really heartening to hear, sort of as we dive into that prioritization process, is hearing, I think, from a lot of you, some general agreement on some of the big issues. And I think a recognition of some of the barriers and the limitations and the challenges. And I think that's really helpful feedback for us. And so what I will do, just in terms of the screening criteria, I think you've provided us with a lot of insight on that. We're not necessarily expecting from you all, I guess, we want you to weight this, twice as valuable as this other thing, but just hearing sort of this prioritization of things that are ongoing. Let's wrap up some of the efforts that have been happening already, making sure that we're within our resources financially and in terms of staff time. And I think also hearing that first discussion of tourism and how that dovetailed with transportation as an issue and just sort of those running together. That's another area where I'm thinking, wow, that's a real bang for the buck. Can we do two things with one effort? And so I think a lot of that discussion, those are just ones, I guess, off the top of my head that we heard. But as you've seen, Andy has been writing away over here. So I think this has been really helpful in terms of our next steps. And in terms of what you guys can expect from us, the next phase is sort of coming out with this draft plan. And I'll reiterate that in terms of goals and vision, don't expect big changes there. I think what we've heard from you all here, what we've heard from the community throughout the process is Plan Manitou overarching themes are relevant and consistent with what the community wants. And so really it's looking at those priority actions and in terms of what we're thinking next, really focusing on those things that are, in the 1 to 3 year time frame, focusing on, I think, some of those priorities we've heard from you today will be sort of top of the list, and then truth testing those against staff. We heard a lot about what they had to say in terms of, what are their goals for the next 5 years. And so I think kind of coming to an alignment on that will be a big part of making sure that we're not overburdening staff and the financial resources. And then really what that would look like, I think, is informing sort of those department work programs and the things that they're going to be, asking for budget on and, prioritizing internally. And then we also don't want people to think that just because an idea doesn't make this, 1 to 3 year time frame, that it's a dead idea. Because there's lots of really good ideas that take a lot longer than that. And there's a lot of really good ideas that might take resources from staff and budget that are worth pursuing, but they're not necessarily going to fall in that 1 to 3 year category. So I don't think we're suggesting to throw out any good ideas that were brought forward, and those would sort of go into that long-term actions, things that might be taking place in 4 or more years. And there is opportunity, I think, as we sort of highlight on the slide, is that if budget becomes available, if staffing becomes available, if community effort and initiative really takes the lead on something, there's opportunity for some of these long-term things to, I think, be expedited. But in terms of what we would come forward with in this next draft of the plan, it'll be really, I think, tailored more towards, coming up with that two-tiered structure is what we're thinking at this point. So would love your feedback on that.
If we may, I think we've got several comments here. Paul and Nancy?
I know, you mentioned vision and so on. And I know that during the last Plan Manitou, there was a discussion on values. Were they included? Do we have values in there? And was that discussed at all this time around?
I am not certain of the terminology. I think there are values that sort of underlie the I guess plan elements. And I think that those are sort of additionally part of what we've heard being carried forward, not major changes to the community values on a lot of these topic areas.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if it's called values, I guess.
Yeah,
the
okay, it's just
terminology.
something that we've discussed
Okay.
in various forms before, is what coming to a common agreement on a short list of values that are in line with the vision for the city. And I'm not sure if that's been done or not. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Other comments? Yes, you've got a couple of thoughts here, and in speaking with Hannah, the previous planning director, I think she found Plan Manitou to be cumbersome relative to a lot of her professional needs. Yes, frankly, I guess, I kind of got the feeling that it was a document that aspired to have a village of unicorns and rainbows at times. I mean, there was a certain amount of fluff, and I mean, it's good to have, I think, some emotional attachment to that, but at the same time, in terms of being a useful planning document for someone like the planning director, to use that in concert with doing things like making grant applications, or or just going through all the various things that we have to do in a professional planning capacity, I think that the sense I got from Hannah that it was cumbersome, and we needed to have something that was more a little more professional, a little more functional and direct, maybe more nuts and bolts, less unicorns and rainbows. Now, maybe there's a place where we have a chapter that's devoted to visionary sorts of things or aspirational qualities, and I think that would be fine. But at the same time, I think we want to come up with a document that paves a way for us and that it's functionally useful. So, Fred, I guess I'm putting that on your shoulders. So, but I think part of what we want is something that helps you get your job done. Okay. And the direction we're giving you is, this is what we want Manitou to look like, and you're the guy that has to do it. So, let us know if we've come up with a professional result that's actionable. I think that's me. And there may be some other different thoughts here, but and this would be the time to hear them. Anybody else? Judith?
Thank you. I'm just referring to, I think it's slide 30 of 37, and it was the proposed screening criteria. And so I think we addressed ongoing effort pretty well, and I like all of those other ones. I think they're very valid, but I guess I would add one more. And we have had several situations where sometimes something's just imperative. Whether it's a community priority or not, it's been imperative. I mean, for example, the water tower. I mean, that's not negotiable, right? And then, when, for example, the driveway of the fire department started to collapse. I mean, it was just imperative. It wasn't, we didn't have a place to move the fire department. I mean, so I guess I would just add that, because there are situations, gosh, COVID, came up, and that we, sometimes the community goes, well, wait a minute, why is this delayed now? But because sometimes, we have these things that we just literally have to hit the pause button and make them a priority, whether, because they're surprises. So that's just a thought.
Great. Thank you, Judith. Other comments, questions? Okay, looks like we're pretty well talked out. Denise, do you have anything you need to tell us relative to this, or can we push on?
No, I just want to say thank you for recognizing that staff can only take on so much. I really appreciate that. Next year, as you know, we have the Dillon, the Hiawatha, the water plant. Those are all very large projects that we're going to be working on. That's very high priority. So just know that we already have a couple of projects that's been prioritized for us for 2025.
Great, thank you. If there is nothing else relative to this, I think we'll call this matter concluded for the time being. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And again, I'd like to, on behalf of City Council, I'd like to thank the members of the Planning Commission for your participation tonight. I think this was neat. We got some good feedback. And I think our visions are kind of coinciding. I think we have a lot of similar sentiments, so I'm encouraged by that. Thank you. And then actually, if the planning commissioners would like to leave, we'll take a minute, and then we're going to receive council correspondence. That won't take long. And of course, you're invited to stay if you'd like to see that or hear that. Okay, council, let's go ahead for correspondence. Judith?
I do too. I just wanted to mention that, I don't know if you noticed, Julie, but the police chief responded to the person that was having issues with their car towed, and they're, I think,
Can't hear you.
moving
Natalie,
forward. Sorry. So we got I checked it during the break. So we got an email from the police chief, and he's working with the person who had emailed us about their concerns about the car being towed, and looks promising. So I just wanted to mention that. Yeah.
Okay.
I still would like to come up with a better solution in the future. I realize that's not on the agenda for tonight, but that's.
I just wanted to mention
good
that
news.
'cause
Yeah.
it was good news.
Yay for Chief Otto.
Great. Judith, did you have something?
I have two things. First of all, I got quite a few very positive comments on these speed humps on Crystal Park Road. And I only got one concern, and that was they weren't high enough. So I got in my car and drove over there today and to see if it would change my behavior, and it certainly did. Not only do I think they're placed well and they're high enough, but I love that there's ballards on each side so you can't cheat and drive around them. So I'm going to say well done. Lots of positive comments on that. And the second one just is an announcement. The Climate Action Work Group is back together with many new members, including residents, business owners, just new people, and so excited to do some environmental initiatives. And to that end, we are hosting a potluck on Saturday, November 16th from 5 to 8 here in City Hall. And more information will be coming with that. We are going to try to do a community engagement where we have the community come and tell the Climate Action Work Group what kind of initiatives they'd like us to focus on for 2025. So we'll give you more information as I have it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Did you have something, Nancy, or Julie? Okay, I've just got a couple things. One, next week, we talked about this, it's October the 1st. That's the night of the vice presidential debate. So we're going to start at 5 and we've got, I think, 2 pieces of business, basically. One is not going to be probably as time consuming as I thought. So we could probably do things justice and be home in time for the debate. I mean, certainly our business at hand it'll take whatever it takes, but I mean, realistically, we've got a chance of seeing all or a good chunk of the debate. So, and I think that was something that was important to everybody. The other thought is, and we talked about this last week also, of having a joint meeting with the school board on, it's Tuesday, October the 29th. Now it's a 5th Tuesday, but I haven't got any feedback that this conflicts with anybody's plans, and it seems like that'd be okay. So that meeting would be that starts at 5:30 up at the school, and we'll have details before then, but if everybody's okay with that, we'll go ahead and set that up. I wanted to check. Any objections or? No, we won't. That'll be. But the school board had asked to meet back in the end of August, and we've kind of put them off. So if that works, we'll plan on that. Okay. That's all I've got. Denise, what do you have?
Yeah, just the speed humps are, remember, a pilot, and they're low. So if you go the speed limit, you'll kind of just glide over. If you're going over the speed limit, you'll have a bump. So it's a little bit different than others. So it's a pilot right now. There are 3 up. We're seeing how it's going to go. I did learn today that we're going to try not to pull them during winter and see how it works. So we're going to have them identified so we'll know to just go over it and not tear them up. So we're going to try it this winter and see how it goes instead of pulling them. And then hopefully next year we have the speed cameras in place. But as you know, we're doing a lot of research on that right now and putting that in place. So just want to share that. And then remember October 8th, all day budget meeting. So or October 12th. God, why do I keep missing dates? October 12th is the all-day budget meeting starting at 8:30.
Right, in October the 8th, which is the second Tuesday,
Would
when
not
we
meet.
normally have a work session, we will not meet because we're going to be meeting that following Saturday. So
Yeah.
you can go ahead and plan something fun to do that night.
Do you know when the budget books might be ready?
We're working really, really hard to have them the Friday before. So that's what we're working on right now, is so you'll have a week, a little over a week to go through it. So we're trying to get all the numbers and everything in there. The numbers are already there. There's a few changes that already need to happen, but that's okay. But then there's a lot of hand things that we're having to put in, and we're working on that to get all of it done. But that's our goal. Goal is to have it that Friday before. And if that means I need to deliver them to you, of course I'll do that so that you can have them.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, we're adjourned.